For 60 years, Ron Howard has been the heartbeat of Hollywood. But now, the man who gave us Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind is sounding a final alarm. The movies you grew up loving aren't just changing, they are being systematically erased. If a legend like Howard is worried, why aren't you? Think about the last time you sat in a dark, quiet theater, completely transfixed by a movie that wasn't trying to sell you a toy, set up a multi-film cinematic universe, or exploit your childhood nostalgia for a corporate intellectual property. Think about a film that was simply about human beings navigating the messy, unpredictable, and beautiful reality of life. Those stories, the ones that once defined our culture and shaped our collective memories, are on absolute life support. The very institutions that built them are now actively pulling the plug. Ron Howard, a man who has witnessed every major transition in modern entertainment, from the death of the classical studio system to the rise of digital streaming, is warning us that the art form itself is being hollowed out from the inside. This is not just a change in taste. It is a systematic destruction of a creative medium. To understand the gravity of Howard's warning, we have to look back at the cinematic ecosystem that once flourished. For decades, the lifeblood of Hollywood wasn't the $200 million blockbuster or the micro-budget art project. It was the healthy, robust middle. We are talking about mid-budget films, typically costing between $30 million and $80 million. These were character-driven dramas, smart psychological thrillers, laugh-out-loud romantic comedies, and sweepingly detailed historical epics. They were movies like Parenthood, Jerry Maguire, A Beautiful Mind, or The Truman Show. This middle tier of filmmaking was where the true magic of Hollywood happened. It was the training ground where actors proved their dramatic depth, where writers crafted complex, original screenplays, and where directors were allowed to take genuine creative risks. But over the last 15 years, a massive, quiet, seismic shift has occurred. Hollywood has completely polarized. Today, the major studios have effectively abandoned the middle. They only want to greenlight two kinds of content. On one hand, you have massive, risk-averse franchise blockbusters costing upwards of $250 million that must appeal to every single demographic on Earth just to break even. On the other hand, you have micro-budget horror films or tiny indie projects made for pennies. The rich, vibrant middle has been systematically demolished. The movies that once captured the cultural zeitgeist have no home left in the modern theatrical landscape. They are being starved out of existence. But wait, before we dive into the shocking evidence of this erasure, we have to address the massive, terrifying lie we have all been sold. We were told that the streaming revolution would save these mid-budget movies. We were told platforms like Netflix, Apple, and Amazon would democratize cinema and give creative freedom back to the artists. But what if I told you the streaming era was actually a Trojan horse? What if the very platforms you subscribe to are actively engaged in the digital assassination of film history, deleting award-winning movies and television series forever for mere tax write-offs? Stick with me, because in just a few minutes, we are going to expose the hidden corporate strategy that explains why major studios actually want their own movies to fail. The truth behind this digital heist will change how you look at your TV screen forever. But first, let's look at the concrete evidence of how fast this erasure is taking place in the physical world. Let's examine 3 real-world examples from Ron Howard's own legendary career that prove the movies we love are dying. First, consider Cinderella Man, Ron Howard's 2005 sports masterpiece starring Russell Crowe and Renee Zellweger. This was a historically detailed, deeply emotional character study about a Depression-era boxer fighting to keep his family fed. The studio backed this human-centered drama with a massive $108 million budget. They believed that a powerful human story, exceptional acting, and cinematic craft were worth that level of financial investment. Today, a budget of that size for a historical drama is an absolute impossibility unless your name is Christopher Nolan. If you pitched Cinderella Man to a studio executive today, they would laugh you out of the room. They would tell you to cut the budget by 80%, fire the expensive cast, and send it straight to a streaming platform with zero marketing, effectively burying it before it even has a chance to find an audience. Second, let's examine Howard's 1991 action thriller Backdraft. To capture the terrifying reality of firefighting, Howard made the radical choice to put real actors in front of real, burning, uncontrollable fire. There was no computer-generated imagery, no green screens, just practical pyrotechnics, expert physical effects coordination, and pure physical danger on set. That tactile, dangerous style of filmmaking created an intense, visceral connection with the audience. You could feel the heat radiating off the screen because the threat was real. Today, that level of physical risk-taking is entirely dead. Modern films rely on digital fire that looks like a cheap screensaver, stripping away the danger, the reality, and the human stakes of the scene because risk-averse executives are terrified of insurance liabilities and production costs. They have sanitized the cinematic experience, replacing raw reality with plastic pixels. Finally, look at what happened with Howard's recent film, Eden. It is a gripping historical thriller starring an incredible star-studded cast including Jude Law, Sydney Sweeney, Vanessa Kirby, and Ana de Armas. It was directed by an Oscar winner and produced by Imagine Entertainment, one of the most successful production banners in Hollywood history. Yet, despite all this star power and prestige, not a single major Hollywood studio would agree to distribute it in theaters. Howard was forced to bypass the studio system entirely, secure a deal with an independent distributor called Vertical, and shoot the film on a restricted, highly efficient budget. He openly admitted that he knew the film was too risky for modern studios because it didn't fit into their pre-approved franchise templates. If an industry legend like Ron Howard cannot get a star-studded movie distributed by a major studio, then the system is not just broken. It is completely dead. This brings us to the core of the streaming trap and why modern films feel so fundamentally different. To understand this, we have to look at the death of the long-tail economy. In the era of physical media, a movie's box office run was only the beginning of its life cycle. If a movie failed to find an audience in theaters, it had a second, often highly lucrative life on VHS, DVD, and cable television. Masterpieces like The Shawshank Redemption, Blade Runner, and Office Space were notable commercial disappointments during their theatrical releases. They became legendary cult classics because audiences discovered them over years of renting them from video stores or catching them on late-night television. This secondary market acted as a critical financial safety net. It gave studio executives the confidence to greenlight strange, original, or challenging projects because they knew they could recoup their investments over the long term. Streaming completely destroyed this economic model. Today, when a movie premieres on a streaming platform, its value is determined within the first 72 hours. If it doesn't immediately drive new subscriptions or trigger a massive spike in viewership, the algorithm buries it deep within the digital archives. There is no long tail. There is no slow burn of discovery. A movie is either an instant, fleeting viral sensation, or it ceases to exist. This harsh reality has forced creators to design content specifically to capture immediate, short-term attention, leading to films that are paced frantically, filled with cheap hooks, and visually flattened so they look acceptable on a mobile phone or tablet screen while you scroll through social media. We have traded cinematic depth for passive background noise. This structural collapse has opened the door for a much colder reality, the rise of algorithmic, executive-driven filmmaking. The past, directors like Ron Howard were trusted to steer the ship. They were the authors of their films, using their unique creative instincts to guide the production from script to screen. But today, the creative process has been completely inverted. The data scientists and financial executives now hold the ultimate veto power. They use predictive modeling, audience tracking, and social media sentiment analysis to dictate everything from casting choices to plot points and visual styles. This algorithmic curation is designed to eliminate financial risk, but in doing so, it eliminates the very elements that make cinema great: surprise, human error, and raw emotional vulnerability. The goal is no longer to make great art. The goal is to create a frictionless, predictable product that keeps viewers staring at their screens just a few minutes longer. When you take the human element out of filmmaking and replace it with automated templates, you don't get cinema. You get content, and content is designed to be consumed and forgotten, not loved and remembered. The major corporations running these studios do not view films as art, they view them as engagement delivery systems. Look no further than Howard's own experience directing Solo, a Star Wars story. He was brought in by Disney after the original directors were fired mid-production for being too experimental and collaborative with their actors. The studio didn't want an unpredictable, creative vision. They wanted a reliable craftsman who could deliver a standardized product on time and on budget to feed the corporate machine. Or look at Hillbilly Elegy, a film Howard directed for Netflix in 2020. Despite a massive marketing campaign and a stellar cast, the movie was immediately sucked into the digital culture wars and the algorithmic vortex of the streaming platform. It didn't exist as a communal theatrical experience where audiences could sit together and reflect. It existed as a data point on a dashboard, optimized for engagement metrics, and then immediately discarded when the next trend arrived. Contrast this with the release of Apollo 13 in 1995. When the oxygen tank exploded and the spacecraft went silent, entire theaters of hundreds of strangers held their breath in perfect communal unison. That shared human experience, that collective intake of breath, is something that cannot be replicated by an algorithm serving a movie to an isolated viewer on a tablet. We are trading connection for convenience. The warning Ron Howard is sounding is not just a complaint from an industry veteran who misses the old days. It is a structural alarm about the death of shared cultural experiences. If we continue to allow corporate spreadsheets and algorithmic metrics to dictate the stories we tell, we will lose more than just our favorite movies. We will lose the very empathy and connection that those movies fostered. We will be left with a sterile landscape of endless sequels, manufactured franchises, and disposable digital noise. But the battle is not entirely lost. Every time you buy a physical Blu-ray, every time you buy a ticket to an original, independent film in a local theater, you are voting for the survival of cinema. You are telling the corporations that human stories still matter. But if you think this systematic destruction of art is limited to the movie theater, you haven't seen the half of it. The very same corporate forces that are killing our movies are currently rewriting the history of television, systematically deleting the shows you loved as a child to save on residual payments. To understand how they are pulling off this digital heist, you need to watch this next video right now.